everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle in which we invite each of you to share with us your life wisdom and experience in response to our different topics that we take up. And today we are taking up the topic of what are trees to us as human beings? What are trees in this year of being truly human? And perhaps we'll find out that our relationship to trees has something indeed to do with being truly human. Our speaker for today, we're very fortunate to have had recommended to us. Forest bathing has become something popular here on Oahu, and Phyllis Look, who does the forest bathing experience for people, was mentored by Ben Page, who's with us today from Southern California. And he is actually the primary mentor in his organization for educating new people who will be leading forest bathing experiences. He's also an author of a book called Healing Trees, Your Pocket Guide to Forest Bathing. And you got in your link a link to his website, and so that you will have a chance to follow through if you'd like to avail yourself of his book. And you also got a couple pages of that book sent to you as well. So Ben, I'd like to hand it over to you. Yeah, what are trees to us? What's our relationship to these wonderful creatures, beings?
It's a good question. Thanks, Renee. I love being prefaced by Henry David Thoreau. I actually grew up about a little less than a mile from Walden Pond. The pond across the street where I live was called Flint's Pond, and there's a wonderful little, they're called drippings of Thoreau's journal that it didn't make it into Walden, but he has a lot of extra writing, and you find a lot of episodes where he would basically go to Farmer Flint's farm and steal Farmer Flint's apples, and then they would have a heated argument about whether you can own the trees or own the apples. And of course, Farmer Flint thought that Mr. Thoreau was incredibly obnoxious. I always enjoy walking around there and thinking about him. So, hello, aloha, konnichiwa. My name is Ben Page, and I'm a forest therapy guide, and I've come to you today to talk a little bit about deep ecology, or some form of deep ecology that comes up in my research and practice of forest bathing. And I feel like I'm in a group that will totally understand what I'm saying when I say that today I'd like to invite you to explore these ideas through the lens of storytelling, and that my contributions here are part of these stories and not really a set of teachings. I think there's just incredible wisdom in all of our stories, and I love this Chinese proverb that says, "Listen to all, plucking a feather from every passing goose, but follow no one absolutely." So today we'll try doing that. So what are trees to us? This is a question that I was asked to facilitate around today, and I spent a few days thinking about it. And as I was thinking about it, part of what I was noticing in my body was like a little bit of tension or a little bit of discomfort. So I was sitting and asking myself, where does this come from? And I think it came from really struggling to have a good answer, because I don't often think about the beings of the more than human world in an abstract sense. That is to say, I don't think of trees as a category of beings, but I do often develop relationships with specific trees. So I'm not exactly sure what trees are to me. I know what the jacaranda that I brought into my yard is to me, and I know what the California black walnut that I live with is to me. And I've met trees all over the world, and I know what they each individually are to me. But trees as an abstract category is something kind of mysterious. The question that came to me is, how can I know without having also been known? how can I cultivate a sense of relationship without that sense of reciprocity? So tonight, I thought we would start with just exploring some of our stories. Stories about specific relationships to specific trees, starting at that kind of intimate level before we move into this more broad and abstract conversation. I think for this one, I'm going to invite you into breakout rooms. So I'm going to send you into breakout rooms with 2 to 3 people in each room. And if you can just introduce yourself, maybe you already know each other, and take some time to share a story about a tree that you have known and that has known you. What does that tree mean to you? Hey, do you have any trees that come to mind?
Yeah, I was really thinking about the trees in my backyard as a child. They were fruitless mulberry trees. I think they were bred that way because mulberry trees tend to be pretty, leave a lot of droppings. I guess that's why. One of the wonderful things about them is that the mulberry leaves are beloved of silkworms. So we got to raise many generations of silkworms with the mulberry leaves. But even much more than that, those trees were my place of solitude and solace. And so I would climb those trees and just stay cradled in, one of the little, what do you call that in a tree? Like the crook or?
A nook or a crook or something?
Yeah. And I think nearly every year, at a certain time of year, my dad would prune those trees. And this was for the health of the trees. But it just ripped my heart out. Every time that he did it, I would cry and beg him not to do that to my trees. They would just get cut away until they were, just had these little short stump of branches, but then they would always grow back beautifully again. But I have, a strong emotional connection with those trees.
What about you, Alexa? Any tree memories popping up?
Yeah, I actually have one too, like a childhood tree. It was a coral tree. It would sit like right behind our trampoline in my backyard. And I don't know, it felt like such an observer of my childhood. So that's kind of what I associate it with, like, because I'd always be outside in the garden and like I'd be on the trampoline probably every single day. And I would often like pick the red flowers. They kind of reminded me of like Dr. Seuss plants when I was little, like something you'd see out of one of his books. So yeah, I definitely felt some connection with that tree. And then also we had a gardenia. I don't know if it's like a tree or bush really, but we had a pretty big one, and my dad would always pick them whenever my grandma would come to town. And he planted it purposely because it's her favorite flower. So I always thought that was really sweet and has like always stood by to me as like a generous plant.
Yeah, the story that's coming to mind after listening to both of you is I also had a childhood tree, and it was, I'm not actually sure what kind of tree it was, but it was one that I would visit when my mother would walk me to preschool. And it grew out of the earth kind of funny, like it kind of grew and then immediately turned so that it grew parallel to the earth before it kind of turned upwards and went to the sky. So it had maybe about 5 or 6 feet of trunk that you could just, even as like a 4-year-old, I could like walk on it. And I remember I always wanted to walk on it. Every single time we went and came back from school, I always wanted to walk on it. It was like walking on top of the world or something, or like on the shoulders of all the trees. And I remember for some reason, I really felt like this was a banana tree. And like as a young child, just being really like never, there's no bananas that come off it. There's no like reason for it to be a banana tree, but for some reason, like it's
Kind of shaped like one, maybe.
that I was just about to say. But yeah, as an adult thinking back on it, I was like, I wonder if that was why I felt this like attachment to this, that it had this curved shape and that, yeah, it was like a banana. But yeah, I just remember just always like having to stop and climb on the tree. It like was not an optional thing. It was like part of the ritual of coming to a place and returning from a place, that like this tree was part of that threshold or that gateway. And then many years later, they cut the tree down and the stump is still there. And even after all this time, my parents still live in the same house that I grew up in. Even after all this time, I'll go and just stand on the stump sometimes. And yeah, it's cool. It's like, it's still there somehow.
Mm-hmm.
It's your giving tree stump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to cry from that book all the time, but it was my favorite when I was little. My mom would be like, "Why do you like this book so much? All it does is make you cry."
Yeah, there's that thing about feeling. It's like incredible. It's incredible just to be having that full physical, emotional experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, what are you noticing about these stories? One of the things that relate or connect these stories together. Does anyone have anything they want to share?
Well, I think in our group we talked, well, what happened is that we were talking about the age of trees. That's not where we started, but from bonsai trees that could be hundreds of years old to one from my childhood, so we were amazed at the growth and how much growth there could be, or how you could miniaturize with bonsai.
Thank you.
I just think we noted that if you're going to spend time with a tree, a tree will, if you really take the time, like in forest bathing, it's an opportunity to be mindful. It's an opportunity to come outside yourself and just be present in the moment. If you really just sort of spend time with a tree.
Thank you.
I was reminded through the group, and also just reminded of the tree characters from Lord of the Rings, the Enses, and they spoke very slowly and purposefully, because they only spoke about things that were worth speaking about. And I'm reminded of that feeling you get when you're in a forest of very old trees, that you're amongst those things that have been around through millennia, through the ages, and they've seen it all and endured it. And it gives you a sort of a peaceful sense of perspective. Thanks for that reminder.
Trees represent stability. I think that comment is pointing that direction. That there's just amazing stability to trees. We have some very high winds around here. And of course, we know that sometimes trees fall down very quickly, but it just seems that they do help us understand that there's stability in the universe that we live in, represented by trees.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that came out of our talking about memories of trees and trees that we, appreciated when we were growing up, and the experiences we had with those. But what I took away from that was really that it's not so much me looking at it, but the relationships, the connections, the communication between. It's sort of a network of being. So it's not an isolated thing, but they all kind of come together in that way.
Well, that connects up with the theme that came up in my mind with our group was sort of you could call it the mythological aspect of trees, that of course, they exhale what we inhale, right? And they inhale what we exhale. So there's that symbiotic relationship that Ben, is it Ben? Yes. Started with. And one does very much get a sense of the kind of what I would call protective wisdom in especially with large trees, which California is famous. The redwood is in terms of mass, has the largest mass of any living thing are the giant redwoods in California. The largest mass of any living thing on the planet is the tree, redwood trees. And the banyan, which is native to the East, and this is the tree that I brought up, was, is particularly known for its capacity to send down new roots from its branches, right? So wherever it originally takes root, sends out these long branches, and then those send down new roots, and those become new trunks. And the one in Lahaina covers almost 2 acres and is 60 feet tall. And it would continue growing out, but they have to prune it back because the city has grown around it. And there's an even larger one in India. I'm not sure. The largest one in the world is in India. So it's this idea, again, the banyan is also the tree under which the Buddha gained enlightenment, right? And the tree has that symbol of the great lineage of beings, the great lineage of Buddhas that preceded the current Buddha. This is one of the many meanings associated with it. So that idea of, this protective, and it is that canopy which is said to have protected the Buddha from the great storms that raged during the night of enlightenment. So it's got so many levels of meaning to it that's deeply embedded in some of the greatest myths of the world. So anyway, I don't want to go on too long, but yeah, it's a great topic.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share anything?
I just wanted to share one thing. It was mentioned that they were the largest individual being, but they're also the oldest. Those redwoods can be 3,000 to 4,000 years old. There's a tree, bristlecone pine called Methuselah that's 4,600 years old. Canary Island, they think they might be 10,000 years old. It's a Japanese tree that's 7,000 years old. It's kind of amazing how long they can live as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I'm also kind of endlessly fascinated by the idea of genetic memory, like encoded in DNA. And trees showed up on this planet like 300 million years ago. And then it's interesting because sharks showed up 450 million years ago. I'm wondering, whoa, what was it like to be here before the trees arrived? These are things I dream about. Well, moving on in this discussion about trees, one of the things I find really fascinating about the work that I do is that for many people, becoming more intimately connected to nature also entails a process of becoming less attached to the idea of our private individual selves. The biologist David Haskell has this great quote. He says, "When we listen to trees, we unself ourselves and become open to great beauty." I thought I would share with you a story from my wandering, which is when I sit with trees, I feel this incredible sense of unconditional acceptance, something about exploring what it feels like to be loved, not in an intellectual sense, but in an embodied way, to actually feel it as opposed to analyzing or trying to understand it. And I noticed that part of the thing that happens for me is that my nervous system calms down when I sit with trees. I feel everything just slows down. And it's like the tree wants me to be there for a very long time. So I ask myself a lot, why? Why does it feel like the tree wants me to stay here? What am I to this tree? Does it like me? Does it love me? And that's when I start thinking about maybe love is not just metaphorical. It's not just mythological or connecting us through a story, that love is actually a physical sensation. And I think Kirk mentioned this, that, perhaps as I sit with the tree recognizes my presence as a being who breathes in oxygen and exhales this carbon dioxide. And that the tree recognizes me by this quality of beingness, this ecological identity. And it wants to hold me close to it because it feels that there is something of value in our relationship. And so the tree doesn't really care so much about Ben Page. The tree's not so much concerned about my identity or belief system or values or ideals. Maybe the tree is not even capable of connecting to me in terms of my story, this ego construction of who I think I am. And so what are we to trees? Perhaps we're not so special. Perhaps we're like the other animals that the trees relate to as well. We eat the fruit and spread their seed. We give them our breath. Maybe we even actively tend to them and care for them. But when the tree gazes, and I say this kind of more in a sense of the tree perceives us, I like to think it sees with its heart. When the tree perceives me, what does it see? Does it see Ben Page? It's not exactly the feeling that I get. I think it perceives me as enmeshed in itself, that we're not actually separate beings, that the more time we spend with each other, the more ecologically enmeshed we're becoming. And this doesn't take a lot of analytical, intellectual work. It's not like a path that requires steps and steps. It's like this flash of lightning, this awareness that comes up, like, I don't have to be special for you. I don't have to do something heroic or magnificent for you to want me to spend time with you. I think that's kind of this sense of unconditional love that a lot of people are often feeling as if they lack. That in our human relationships, there's often a lot of tension. One of my other favorite Chinese proverbs is, tension is who you think you should be, relaxation is who you are. So I often feel like that when I'm with the trees. It's like, I don't have to be someone special for you. I can just relax. So this makes me wonder about our prompt as well. How can we ask this question, what are trees to us, without also turning this conversation on its head? So I'm curious, maybe we can do this as a full group instead of going out into breakout rooms. I'm just curious, what are we to trees? How might we imagine that the trees perceive us? To speak to this question, you may have to listen to and speak from the heart. Perhaps this is not a question that can be seen only with the mind. So just throwing it out there to the group, I'm curious what your thoughts are about this.
Let me add something on top of what you've been said about ecological enmeshment, or being ecologically enmeshed. I think that's a wonderful idea that leads me to a thought that perhaps to trees, we are not a separate thing, as Bob Buss mentioned, but a set of relationships. And if we think about the totality of these working relationships as an ecology, your term of ecological enmeshing, I think is very, very provocative, especially since the ecology that we have today, of which trees are a part, or is very different from the ecology that there was when trees first started to exist. When trees first started to exist and produce oxygen and carbohydrates from light and water and minerals through photosynthesis, when trees were doing all that, we weren't around to breathe the oxygen, nor were any other animals around to enjoy the oxygen or the fruits or the flowers that the trees produced. And the ecology was very, very different then, but trees were there in some form, not in their present form, but same tree, that ability to draw from energy from light and together with other things like water, produce food for itself and for the world. And so that this kind of ecological enmeshment has changed over time. And I'm pretty sure that the tree looks at us somewhat as a co-evolving set of relationships that enmeshment, I think, well describes. And so rather than, just to kind of summarize it, rather than a thing, we are to trees part of that ongoing evolution of ecological enmeshment. Well, how does that sound?
I think that sounds great. Thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else like to share?
You mentioned earlier a book by a person named David Haskell, and he has this wonderful book called The Unseen Forest. And he went into, I think it was Tennessee, an old growth area, and he sort of picked out a place that he called a mandala, which was about 1 meter in circumference. And he just sat down and looked at it. And for a whole year, every week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, he'd come, even in storms and winter, and he'd keep looking at that 1 meter of earth. And sometimes a big animal like a chickadee would come in, but mostly he was looking at slugs and ants and, millipedes, and just the changingness of it. And at one point, he was talking about something that really fascinated me, was that he felt that there was not just the aroma of, say, a eucalyptus tree, but there were chemicals that were kind of coming from the forest into his blood, into his stream. And there was kind of a chemical relation of this network of what he was experiencing over this year of this single place that, kind of, it gave him a whole different way of experiencing it. And that was, I think he then referred to the Japanese custom or practice of forest breathing, where you actually breathe in not just oxygen, but a lot of network communicative kind of elements, molecules.
Absolutely. Don't get me started on this because I'll take up all of our time. But yeah, this thing about enmeshment, it really challenges our notion of separateness. Even having a personal, private sense of self within the body, when we start to recognize how porous the body actually is, and that the layer of skin is not like a wall between us and the world. It's actually this incredible gateway. And through all of our senses, through bringing the world into our body and then releasing the world back, it's like, well, how separate could we really be right now? And then seeing that even within the body, we tend to have this philosophical problem in the West about thinking that we are in the mind, that there is this dualism or a Cartesian split of the body and the mind. And the mind is like the thing, and the body is just this machine that gets controlled by the mind. Meanwhile, when we look into the body, we see that the body is composed of many organisms that aren't even human, that we are this walking ecological ecosystem that actually doesn't care what we think about it. It doesn't really need us to be to think it's real or not. It just continues its unfolding process. There's this thing happening below our threshold of attention or consciousness where every breath we take is somehow enmeshing us into the places that we live, and the world is coming in. It's like, I don't know, I think that's amazing. And I think that's where, for me, I understand what Haskell means when he talks about unselfing ourselves, that we start to see ourselves in a much bigger story than Ben Page's story. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, maybe I'm not Ben Page's story. Maybe I'm actually Los Angeles story, or North America story, or Earth story, or universe story. Maybe this is all happening and I'm just entertaining myself with stuff up here. Does anyone else want to share anything about this? And thank you, Bob.
Well, can I ask you then, assuming that we do have or can have these experiences and even want them, what outside of just having the experience for its own sake, for unselfing, for relaxing, I hate to use the word, what can we do with them? Because do may not be the right word, but outside of being calm and patient and calming, how can this help others, and particularly those kind of less fortunate or less aware of the things we're talking about?
How can hanging out with trees help others? It's a good question. I see David has his hand up. David, do you want to answer this question?
I was going to invite you to speak on that issue about the mycelium that connects the trees together. And so it made me think with that last question about how the mycelium, their function is to give. They're a little bit of a Robin Hood, if you will. They'll borrow from those that are strong and give to those that are weak. And I wonder if when we do some forest bathing and become more peaceful beings, if we then share our peacefulness with others that may be in need, and like the mycelium, then give our good, calm energy to one another.
With only 20 minutes left, these are really expansive questions. I guess to speak to the first question, there are many stories through which we could interpret an answer to this question. In the first story, if we ask what is found in this for others, our response might be, what others? Perhaps there are no others. There's this study that they were researching evolutionary social changes, and this was done, I think, in Japan. There was like an island of monkeys, and if like 2 or 3% of the monkeys figured out how to do something, all the monkeys figured out how to do it almost instantly. Like the jump in social change and the evolution of their social climate rapidly evolves once a very small minority of them would master this piece. So as we think about this thing of like nature connection, why are we doing this? Like, what's so important about this? Part of my story is this is like this is a spiritual process of coming home to being a part of the earth without judgment. I spoke about the unconditional love that the human can feel from the tree. So now my next piece has to be, well, how can we extend that unconditional love towards the earth? I find this is something that really challenges people an incredible amount, because we tend to have a divisive mentality about what is good ecology and what is bad ecology. What is the earth supposed to look like? This is where deep ecology is essentially a critique of most environmentalism, which is kind of anthropocentric. It's saying, like, how can we figure out how to make the earth a good place for human beings to live? And so turning that around and saying, well, maybe humans shouldn't be the sole consideration here. And so it's like this process of learning how to love the earth that is changing. I think some people here mentioned that they're either practicing or interested in Buddhist ideas. And it's like, this strikes to the fundamental issue with change. We don't like change. We just want things to be good. We just want things to stay the same. And we've been living in this really beautiful moment in the Earth's evolutionary history, this incredible moment. And we also know that that moment won't last forever, and that the Earth will have natural changes. And so it seems part of the human response is to create this like gripping fear of the change and say, no, like we can't let things happen. We're responsible now for fixing the earth. And when I hear people talk about this, for me, part of it is like, the earth doesn't need you to save it. It's like part of our anthropocentric bias, part of our kind of species supremacy, that we think that it's our job. And so for me in my own practice, part of this is learning to fall in love unconditionally with the earth, to wake up every day and see that the earth is changing, and to still say, I love you no matter what, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Now, how does this help people? Part of it is just returning to the state of calm promotes a sense of calmness in the environment around us, that this ripples out into the world. That if we remember how to slow down and how to come away from ourselves, we gain the ability to have deep attention. And that's where most of the good work happens. I think in some ways, nature does have some things to teach us that are widely applicable to everyone. And nature can be the gateway to that learning, but then humans can actively teach each other it without any complicated technology. I'm always telling people, I want to work myself out of a job. I just want everyone to know how to slow down, turn off their brain for a while, go outside and sit under a tree. And if every person were doing that, I think this would have an incredible benefit to the human and the more than human worlds. Beyond that, it's kind of, instead of seeing people as individuals, seeing that we have a global culture that's having a serious problem right now. And I think this problem actually kind of mirrors inward and outwardly. We're having the same problem about infinite growth, where we're addicted to the infinity of possibilities that life presents us. My generation, we were all told, you can become anything you want to be in this world if you work hard enough, which has created an obsessive work culture, and that has been projected inward, where now myself is also a product that I'm constantly working on and constantly needing to prove to myself and to other people that I'm a good person, that I deserve to be here. And it creates a lot of challenges. If you're curious about this and how it relates to mental health, there's a philosopher named Byung-Chul Han who wrote a wonderful book called The Burnout Society, where he explains that essentially the reason why people burn out is because they're addicted to achievement. And that's not their fault, of course. They've been taught to be addicted to achievement. And the infinite growth mindset applied to ourselves speeds us up, makes us incredibly hyper attentive and hyper neurotic, where we cannot slow down because we experience it as a form of suffering. Because we're not earning anything, we're not achieving something, we're not being the best version of ourselves, we're not manifesting. So rest has become this thing that is excluded from our experience. And I think this is where the trees, and it's not just trees, I mean, the entire natural realm can probably mentor us in this sense of just slowing down a little bit. And I think we kind of have this sense of needing to be perfect and be good creates a lot of focus on the self. You could call this a form of kind of narcissism, that we become very obsessed with ourselves and we take the idea of ourselves incredibly seriously. And then being with the trees, I think, really helps. Like I said, they're maybe not so interested in whether you have achieved something great. And maybe that connects you to a sense of phenomenological love, not a metaphorical love about reasons to love the earth. We have a lot of metaphorical reasons to love the earth. But what does it feel like to love the earth? What is the actual phenomenon? All right, I've just rambled for a little while. I don't know if that really addressed these questions, but I see Bob wants to say something.
No, it's basically just following up from what you just said. The Christian Thomas Merton talked about, he said, like everyone, I live under the bomb, but also I live in the woods. And he had that sense of, he referred to the forest as his bride. And he said, that's where I experience God. And it's not so much that I find God, but that I'm aware of him in the same way as I'm aware of the sun, the pine tree, that just a sense of, he said it was love and it was silence, that those two things allowed him to go out into the world or to experience it with a whole different sense than here I am doing something. He even said, the wren will either jump on my shoulder or it won't. And that's it. It's not it doing something. It's when it jumps on my shoulder, it's jumping on my shoulder. That's what it is. And when it's over here, that's what it is. It's not doing it. It is it.
Right. Right. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share anything?
Yeah, especially maybe part of our female tribe that's here. I'd love to hear some of the.
I can only see 4 people across the top, so if you want to jump in, just unmute yourself and jump on in. I have one more thing I can talk about a little bit, and then maybe we can just have like an opportunity to check out and close up so we maintain our timeline here. One of the things that I'm quite interested in is this thing about consciousness, our perception of reality. And many years ago when I was doing my thesis, I read Ken Wilber's The Atman Project, which some of you may know. In this book, Wilber discusses a cycle of consciousness that he describes kind of as an outward arc and then an inward arc. A simple way of saying this is that the first half of life is about finding yourself and the second half is about losing yourself, and that these are reciprocal processes. One invariably leads to the other. It's kind of the yin yang of developmental spiritual psychology. So at the advent of this inward arc, Wilber describes a state of consciousness that in my reading suggests this sense of intersubjectivity, or the ability to feel the world around us, not contained from our own individual perspective, but beginning to see it through a story that includes multiple protagonists, multiple main characters. We are not the only main character any longer. And I feel like this is part of the journey with trees for people. This is part of the unselfing, that all of a sudden we start to perceive perceive ourselves not as separate from, but enmeshed in the stories of the ecological world. That the beings of the earth are not the audience or the setting, the stage for this human story. They're actually active participants in a dynamic experience of beingness. You might consider this like a biogenesis, or extrapolating even further, kind of a cosmogenesis, that we're all connected to this unfolding story. We're not actually separate, having this human thing going on. And as we approach this sense of intersubjectivity, as we begin to sit long enough that we begin to unself ourselves, we're beginning to understand something about the nature of our reality. It's interesting to me that trees are genetically our cousins. Somewhere in our evolutionary line, human beings and trees share a common ancestor, so that we're all part of this unfolding process. And in light of that, I wonder, what are trees to us? So maybe I'll just offer this as a checkout question. We have 5 minutes left. Maybe sharing very leanly, maybe just a sentence or two. I would really love to know for you, what are trees to us? Maybe the wisdom lies at the center of our circle. Would anyone like to start?
I'd like to say something, if I may, and in a kind of feeble attempt to address, I think it was Maurice's question about how all of this might be able to help other people. I think that the old growth forest that Bob Buss mentioned may help greatly in this possible, in one way, namely, in the old growth forest, as I understand it, things evolve together. It is not the case that this evolution that became the old growth forest started with trees as they are and microbes as they are and other plants as they are. But things started before they reached their present form and co-evolved in ways in which the entirety of the forest becomes more efficient, more resilient, more innovative in its further evolution. If we look at our problems that we face today, or if we look at someone who is having problems, in an odd sort of way, this might be able to help in the long run. Namely, if a person looks at the problem in terms of other things, they as one thing and the aggressors as another thing, there certainly are irresolvable difficulties that can lead to war and other kinds of conflict. But if we, as Ben, you were saying, unself ourself, and who the person we listen to is not that self, but something bigger, something with more latency of co-evolution. And so if we can evolve together, like the old growth forest, we might be able to find something that is more efficient than wars and survival of the fittest, and more resilient in its innovative ways of forming new relationships among the relationships that are already there, and building up the capacity for further evolution of the entirety. In this way, the problems that we face with each other are part of a larger evolution of relations in which a new me emerges and a new team emerges, a new humanity emerges. Just as in the old growth forest, the entirety reinvents itself because of its ability to listen and co-evolve with each other. And so I do believe this can help other people. I do believe this is a compassionate route that opens up if we follow the lead of the old growth forest. Well, let me stop there.
Thank you for sharing that. Well said. Yeah. I personally, like, this is maybe at the end of this call, I can tell you that a lot of my work is influenced by Zen, and through Zen, kind of a early philosophical Taoism. And this makes me think of a capping phrase that was given to me. It says, "In the beginning, I practiced for the benefit of others. Who would have thought what a fool I could have become?" And it's like, I guess for me, the thing that comes back to the mystery is feeling that I trust nature without needing to understand where it's all going. That we're kind of riding this cycle. And there's something really beautiful about being a part of it, or taking the moment to slow down and recognize that we are a part of it. And I don't know if that necessarily lends itself well to answering a question like, how does this help us? Because from this angle, what is helping? Maybe this is where it comes back to a question about unconditional love, or a conversation about the nature of suffering, that we learn to be compassionate by being in this journey together. Well, I wish I could go on about that for another 30 minutes. It's 7 o'clock, so I guess, Renee, do you want to say anything to kind of close us up? I'll just say it was a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much, Ben. Sandra, did you want to mention something? Notice you leaning in.
No, I'm just enjoying it all. I look forward to getting your book, Ben. It's yeah.
Thank you. I hope you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, sure.
And for myself, I wanted to say I appreciated the idea of reflecting back on my relationship with some trees in my backyard as a child. And I also loved remembering the book that both Alexa, our staff who's helping us today, staff member, loved as children. And well, I guess I didn't have it as a child, but I loved reading it to my children. And it was called The Giving Tree. And when Ben told us his story of a childhood tree friend of his that grew out horizontally before it went up vertically. And as a 4-year-old or so, he would like to walk along that tree trunk. Even though the tree itself has been taken down, that stump is still there. And if you remember that book, The Giving Tree, there was all that was left after the boy had taken away the apples and the branches, and I don't remember all the things he took. He finally took the trunk of the tree, and there was just a stump there. And the boy comes back finally as an old man. He's very tired. And he just sits on the stump. And the tree was happy. And I was so thankful to be reminded of why that story has such a dear place in my heart, or maybe explained a little bit why that has such a dear place in my heart. That there is a certain unconditionality that Ben mentioned in this relationship between the tree and the little boy, who is now the old man. This unconditionality coming from the tree. That was so wonderful to be reminded of, Ben. Anybody else want to give a vote of thanks? David.
I would love to. I would just like to include everyone who participated either by contributing their words or just by being in the presence. But Ben, that was a beautiful gem, well presented, nicely organized. And thank you so much for introducing the idea of the breakout rooms and giving us that opportunity to do more connecting and also to hear from the group. Just the place from which you speak, to hear and to feel your heart in your work. It was really beautiful. It was such a gift for all of us. Thank you so much.
Yes, everyone, a little round of thank you for Ben. That was really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thank
Very,
you.
very enjoyable.
Mahalo, Ben.
Yes, mahalo.
It was like sitting next to a large tree for a half hour, an hour maybe.
Indeed.